Alright, I'm here to talk about The Accountant 2. So, The Accountant 2, as you may have already guessed it, this is a sequel to the 2016's Accountant. Remember that movie? Well, just a little bit. And to be honest, man, I didn't really expect that film to have a sequel, because that first film was a pretty much standalone story with everything wrapped up beautifully at the end of that film. So, when I know that there was a sequel in the making, I kept asking myself, what could the plot be? Because everything from the first film wrapped up so beautifully, and they really didn't leave any loose ends to carry over to the second film. But nonetheless, here we are. So, the second film follows Christian Wolf, played by Ben Affleck, and his brother, Braxton Wolf, played by Jon Bernthal. And Jon Bernthal in this second film plays a really big part, a really big role, because in the first film, they just introduced him a bit, but they leave him alone for the first film. But in the second film, he is along for the ride. And together, they must uncover the mystery of a missing child who is later evolving into a human trafficking plot. Now, do I really think the plot that they chose here really matched for a sequel to The Accountant? Well, I don't think this is the perfect plot of the movie, but then again, there's the plot that we got. And let me jump to the positives here, alright? Because there are a lot of positives. As you may know from the trailers, that you can see the tone that they're trying to go for is a little bit different this time around. If you remember the first film was gritty, dark, and super serious. Sometimes it took itself too seriously. And this second film, it takes a different approach. Everything here is a little bit lighthearted, but also at times really maintains that seriousness from the first film. And the lighthearted tone really comes from Braxton, Christian Wolf's brother, who is basically his partner during this investigation. And yes, in some scenes, they bicker a lot, they argue a lot, and they joke a lot. The comedy in this film is utilized very, very well. At first, I really was skeptical about that approach because I was afraid, I was concerned that the comedy here would come as, a cringe comedy. But really, it did not. It really comes across as a natural banter between these two guys. Because, the deep emotional core of the second film is about these two brothers trying to reconnect, to connect with people, to talk with people, even though they're not used to it clearly. So, the second film really does revolve around that a little more than the first film. And to some degree, it really works because it brings up the fun moments, the scenes where they're bickering, comparing to each other. I think that is a really good touch for this film. It really generates laughter and, overall a lighthearted tone that this film really is trying to achieve. And to that regard, I really do think the lighthearted tone mostly works within this film. There are other times though where, Jon Bernthal says something a little bit too much, a little bit trying too hard to be comedic, but it comes across as annoying. Well, because at some scenes they pushed it too far, but at some other scenes, particularly, for instance, the bar scene, it is really fun because I really did not think the bar scene is the funniest thing in this film, but it ended up being one of the funniest moments during the entirety of this film. And that bar scene, man, it was a highlight of this film because, well, there is a moment that you do not expect from a movie, from an action film like The Accountant 2, but it really exists and it really hammers home the comedic feel and the lighthearted tone that they are trying to go through. The second positive here, because this is an action film, well, it does include some action, but the approach here is just to breeze it, because there aren't a lot of action in it, and they're saving it for the big action set piece for the ending. The ending of this film really hammers home. It really gives you enough action to, to satisfy you. So if you're here searching for the action, yes, you will need to wait a little bit longer, but when the action is there, it really does satisfy you. It really is satisfying, gory, and really exciting to watch. Now, let's move on to the negative. For the negative, I do feel like the scale of this conflict, this human trafficking conflict, is a little bit, small. And I really don't think that is necessarily the best part, the best plot point that they could go through, because I was not expecting a human trafficking plot to be in an Accountant sequel. Well, that is my first negative. And the second negative that I had with this film is the pacing, particularly in the first act, because in the first act they're trying to piece this mystery together to solve this mystery, but it really did take a little bit of time to get there, because you're here for the action, for the humor, for the interaction between Christian and Braxton. But at the first part, at the first chunk of this film, it really does move a little bit too slow. So the pacing for the first act is off. But once you get to the second act and the third act, it really tries to, speed things up a bit. So yes, The Accountant 2 is, well, it is a decent sequel. It is a lighthearted sequel. And deep down, I know that their first Accountant did not really need a sequel, because everything is done in that movie. Everything wraps up perfectly fine. But the fact that it got a sequel really is a plus point, because this can be like the next Equalizer franchise, where every movie is a standalone, alright? But it is a fun trilogy. And yes, the only other franchise that I can compare this to is the Equalizer franchise, because everything in there is standalone, but everything works perfectly well as a trilogy. So if there is gonna be a trilogy, then fine, alright? So overall, I will give the second Accountant film a 7 out of 10. Yes, this is really not a masterpiece, no, but if you're trying to pass the time watching a 2-hour action film with fun chemistry, fun action, lighthearted moments, you will get it from The Accountant 2. So 7 out of 10. If you have seen The Accountant 2, tell me everything you like, everything you do not like, and how does it compare to the first Accountant. And do you really think that the first Accountant film, really needed a second film, or they should have just left it alone as a standalone movie? Everything. Tell me everything down in the comment section, and see you on the next video.